Good afternoon. Sorry for the lateness. I want to thank everybody for being here. And before we begin, I'm going to take a moment to ask for Dan Musser to lead us in opening prayer and the pledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If all would just please bow your heads. Dear Lord, we appreciate you bringing us all together here today to discuss the important matters facing our wonderful country. We appreciate the administrator of the Small Business Administration being here with us, and we ask your blessings as we try to bring wisdom and intelligence and just simply do the right thing for our small businesses and our country. Amen.
Stand for the pledge.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I now call the Committee on Small Business to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. I now recognize myself from opening statements, and today's hearing will focus on the much-needed oversight of the Small Business Administration. And first, I want to thank our witnesses, Administrator Guzman, for joining us today, a fellow Texan. Thank you. And as someone with ties to the great state of Texas, it's a pleasure to have you here today. I hope this is the first of several productive hearings we will have with you at this Congress, so I appreciate your making the trip to speak with us today. This hearing could not come at a more important time for Main Street America, and our nation's small businesses are facing unprecedented levels of inflation, interest rates that are being raised at the fastest pace since the 80s, and a labor shortage that have windows plastered with help wanted signs across our country. As a small business owner, I have been working with these economic headwinds. This committee must ensure that the Small Business Administration is focusing their attention on ways to help them get through these daunting challenges. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the SBA was asked to step up in ways that they've never had to do before. While they were able to get money out the door quickly, the after-action report showed there were serious problems within the agency. A disorganized management structure and a lack of basic guardrails to prevent fraud led to unacceptable amounts of waste of taxpayer dollars. And in the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the Office of Inspector General found potentially $78 billion in loans and grants were fraudulently obtained. Criminal opportunists took advantage when the SBA was overwhelmed with the sheer volume of work they were asking to do, and the taxpayers were the ones left holding the bag. It usually happens. Well, there were many past findings that showed that could have been done to prevent fraud. There are other recommendations that were made in the last few months that could have remedied some of these crimes, and unfortunately, it looks like the SBA is not taking these recommendations seriously. For example, against the OIG's advice, the SBA has decided to end their collection and forgive all PPP loans with an outstanding balance of $100,000 or less. While I support ensuring that the forgiveness process is as seamless as possible for small business owners, you cannot help but wonder how many illegitimate entities were able to walk away with tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars because of this decision. Given all the problems the SBA had during the pandemic, we must have a serious discussion on the role the SBA should be playing in the future. The President's budget proposal and some rules currently being developed by the agency make it very clear that this administration thinks the SBA did a great job over the past few years and deserves more responsibilities. I completely disagree with that assessment. With such high levels of fraud that occurred during the pandemic and the most recent failures of large banks in California and New York, I have serious concerns about expanding the government-backed 7A loan program and increasing the SBA's role as a regulator. Additionally, I'm very concerned that the President's budget request diverts resources away from the programs that have bipartisan support and a proven track record of helping Main Street to duplicate programs with unclear performance metrics. And finally, we continue to hear how the customer service of the agency continues to fail our constituents. We must ensure the agency is capable of handling their current tasks before they expand into more areas. Main Street America has been forced to endure profound challenges over the last couple of years, and I hope this hearing can serve as the starting point to get the SBA back on track. Too much is at stake for America's small businesses to be not taken seriously. And I want to thank you all again for being here with us today, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation. And with that, I want to yield our distinguished ranking member from New York, Ms. Velasquez. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Administrator Guzman, for testifying before the committee today. It has been 2 years since you were confirmed as SBA Administrator. In those years, SBA delivered more than $1 trillion in pandemic relief, saving countless jobs and small businesses from permanent closure. And there has been a record number of small business applications, thanks in large part to an historic investment in not just the nation's economic recovery, but also its future. This effort unlocked opportunities for Americans, leading to a surge in entrepreneurship, which is vital to our economy. Small businesses have the power to spark economic growth and create good jobs, paying jobs in our local communities. They can turn Main Street into a vibrant destination where retailers, restaurants, and personal service businesses can thrive. And entrepreneurship can spark innovation, bringing new ideas and solutions to the marketplace. Looking ahead to the next 2 years, I hope to learn more about your vision for the agency. In particular, how SBA's FY 2024 budget plan will nurture our nation's 3.33 million entrepreneurs and innovative startups while creating a landscape that will be ripe for local economic growth. Part of that discussion will inevitably include SBA's IG and GAO's reports and recommendations on the pandemic relief programs. Their investigations have identified billions of dollars in potential fraud, and it is important for the committee to hear the steps you have taken to address fraud and save taxpayers' dollars. Finally, I want to hear from you about the 2 proposed rulemakings, which could lead to major changes in how the 7A program operates. The stated intent of the 2 rules is to fill a gap in underserved markets. And it goes without saying that ensuring support for minority-owned small businesses and entrepreneurs from underserved communities is a top priority of mine. With that said, I have been disappointed with the SBA's initial lack of engagement on the proposed rulemakings, and question remains that I hope can be answered prior to finalizing the rules. Put simply, the agency should slow down and address issues with fraud in the Paycheck Protection Program before moving forward with major policy changes to the 7A program. As you know, the IG identified 70,000 potentially fraudulent PPP loans totaling more than $4.6 billion, and a disproportionate share of these loans were made by fintechs. These entities are not subject to the same prudent lending rules as traditional banks and credit unions, and lifting the moratorium on SBLCs to allow non-regulated entities to participate in SBA flagship lending program may not be the best way to reach underbanked communities. Congress put the moratorium in place 40 years ago to safeguard the 7A loan program and make sure the agency had the resources to supervise lenders effectively. We do not have any assurances that SBA has the bandwidth to manage these new unregulated entities, even though we have been asking. Major policy changes cannot be made hastily. The agency should be working with this committee and stakeholders to improve the program while still protecting its integrity. Let me finish by stating there may be areas of disagreement throughout this hearing, but that is part of the legislative process. Today's hearing will give us an excellent opportunity to closely examine the achievements we have made for small businesses, but also to discuss the challenges they face and learn how best to support them through our bipartisan efforts. I look forward to our discussion, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And it's my honor today to introduce our witness, Small Business Administrator Guzman. Administrator Guzman is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School of Business. In March 2021, she was confirmed as the 27th Administrator of the Small Business Administration. Prior to becoming SBA Administrator, Ms. Guzman served in various capacities in the agency for 9 years, including as Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at the SBA. Ms. Guzman also served as a small business advocate for the state of California. Administrator Guzman is tasked with ensuring that the SBA's programs and services are available to all small businesses, no matter who or where they are, so they can have access to capital, revenue growth opportunities, and support networks all entrepreneurs need to start, grow, and lead our economy. As the person tasked with leading the SBA during such an important time for America's small business, we have brought Administrator Guzman here to address growing concerns, as you've heard, of the agency's effectiveness, priorities, and issues facing Main Street America. Administrator Guzman, thank you for joining the committee today, and I'm looking forward to your important conversation with you. And so I now recognize Ms. Guzman for her 5-minute opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and Chairman Williams, Ranking Member Velasquez, as well as the distinguished members of this committee. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come and discuss the U.S. Small Business Administration and the impact that we have on the entrepreneurial community, as well as the continuous improvements that we've made in helping small businesses start and grow. The entrepreneurial spirit of the American people, as you've seen, their trademark grit, determination, and agility have really made small businesses in our nation the most important driver of job growth, competition, and innovation. America's entrepreneurs have not only helped deliver an incredible economic expansion, but they are also powering a surge in new businesses. 21 to 22, 10.5 million new business applications were filed, the most in any 2-year span on record. Our nation's small businesses continue to need support as they position to grow their businesses and pivot to continue to adapt to remaining supply chain challenges, inflationary pressures, and the tight labor market. They consistently share that funding is one of their biggest challenges, especially as we see they are facing rising interest rates and tightening credit standards. Access to affordable capital is one of my key priorities at the SBA. In 2022, SBA delivered more than $43 billion across our capital programs and finally reversed a 5-year decline in small dollar lending. But we continue to see large gaps in this space, especially in loans under $150,000. This funding gap truly limits entrepreneurial growth, especially for the smallest of the small, as well as for minority, veteran, rural, and other underserved, historically underserved small businesses. To effectively address this market gap, the SBA must streamline its regulations and its capital programs. First, we need more competition and capacity in small business lending. That is why we proposed expanding our distribution networks by revitalizing the existing Small Business Lending Company, or SBLC program. The SBLC rule will make the Community Advantage pilot program permanent and provide certainty to the over 100 nonprofit mission lenders who have been effectively lending to underserved communities through this program in the 7A. With permanence, the SBA can expand the number of these mission lenders serving the hardest to reach small businesses through a new Community Advantage license. We will also lift the cap on regular SBLC licenses, enabling SBA to admit new non-depository lenders aligned with the agency's mission in the 7A program. Second, we will modernize our loan products and meet our businesses where they are by cutting red tape and complexity that exists in our 7A and 504 programs through our proposed affiliation rule. Based on extensive feedback from our lending partners over the past decade, we will streamline affiliation rules, which lenders have shared are burdensome. We will also align with existing lender best practices on credit underwriting. As we implement, we will prioritize maintaining the core integrity and oversight of SBA's lending programs. Based on past oversight performance and existing structures and processes, we can both improve our support for underserved communities and fill capital gaps, as well as ensure program integrity at the same time. Third, we will add a provision to help owners with business transitions to employee ownership, an issue many of the members of this committee have supported. SBA is finding ways for its products to help finance partial buyouts so that an owner can sell their business to employees, for example, for a successful exit. Finally, a bipartisan interest of this committee has been to attract more private investment capital to innovative startups critical to our national economic competitiveness and our national defense. Our proposed rule modifying the Small Business Investment Company, or SBIC program, will add a new accrual SBIC license to incentivize patient and growth capital. It will also expand investment in rural and underserved communities by ensuring a diversified portfolio across the nation and streamlining and improving the licensing process. These 3 rules will help the SBA more effectively address capital gaps so we can power entrepreneurship. As we move forward with these updates to our capital programs, we will continue to build on the lessons learned through managing the biggest disaster response in our agency's history. Our COVID relief helped millions of small businesses navigate the pandemic and preserve jobs, recover quickly. However, while these programs have ended, the SBA's portfolio has changed, and we continue to support small businesses through ongoing loan servicing, grant reporting, and PPP forgiveness processing. We will work with Congress to ensure the agency has the necessary resources to serve these small businesses. The SBA has implemented the Biden-Harris priority effort to combat fraud and pandemic relief. Aligned with the Inspector General and the GAO recommendations, we've instituted standard fraud protections to deliver funds with not just speed, but also certainty. We also improved SBA operations by implementing the GAO recommended fraud risk framework. And we continue to collaborate with the Inspector General to recover stolen funds. The SBA is more strongly positioned than ever to combat fraud, waste, and abuse. And this strengthened position enables us to better serve the 33 million small businesses and disaster survivors into the future. So I appreciate your time, and I do look forward to diving into more detail with your questions regarding all of SBA's critical programs around capital and technical assistance.
Thank you for being here. Now, we will now move to the member questions, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Businesses need long-term certainty. I'm a small business owner, and you have to deal with certainty as they make decisions on where to invest in their operations. In the next few years, some major components of the Tax Cuts and Job Act will be expiring. Specifically for small businesses organized as pass-throughs entities, there will be a large increase for their tax liability because these businesses pay individual income tax rates instead of the corporate tax rate. Administrator Guzman says 80% of all small businesses are organized as pass-throughs. Will you commit to working with the President to make sure that these small businesses won't have their taxes increased when this provision expires?
The President has demonstrated that he's committed to lowering costs for families and small businesses, and we recognize the Trump tax cut did not make permanent these small business tax assistance, only the corporate. So as a lot of small businesses, of course, are not corporation, we remain committed to providing the advice and being that voice of small business on all issues.
You're recommending to him that he keep that component then?
The President's, obviously Congress makes the tax policy,
Right.
and I know the President has
He supports
committed to working with Congress to ensure that we can help ensure that a vibrant economy.
Okay. There's been bipartisan concerns over the proposed changes to the SBA's flagship 7A lending program. Now, given the recent failures of some large banks in California and New York, it does not seem wise to change some of the prudential underwriting standards of this lending program while simultaneously opening that up to more companies whose sole federal regulator will be the SBA. The 7A portfolio is backed by the government, so if something goes wrong, the taxpayers are on the hook. And so, Administrator Guzman, how do you justify relaxing the underwriting standards of this program when we just experienced the second largest bank failure in our country's history? And secondly, does the SBA even have the authority to transition pilot program participants into full-time 7A lenders without an act from Congress, as the rule does?
So the SBLC program is an existing program. It's been 4 decades long, and we have 14 SBLCs currently. We've passed over those licenses multiple times. They've had 60 different licenses as well across those licenses. There was a moratorium put in place. We are recommending lifting the moratorium so that we can allow for more competition and a broader distribution network, as we saw with PPP. With this, we plan to implement strong controls within this program, as we have been doing for the past 4 decades. We have strong credit risk management processes and controls in place to ensure that these SBLCs, as well as our community advantage lenders, can perform, and that includes in credit underwriting as well.
You want to make sure you tighten up the overseers. That's important. Before any business makes an investment decision, they must have a general understanding of the return they will see on dollars spent, and I think it's responsible for the government to do the same thing. So kind of return on investment. So I want to go over some numbers in the Office of the Budget request to see if they make sense in terms of ROI for the taxpayers. And the SBA's budget request, it states the Community Navigators Program spent $131 million in fiscal year '22, which started 422 new businesses and serviced 16,312 new clients. This means it cost the taxpayers over $300,000 for each new business started and over $8,000 per client serviced. During the same period, the SBDCs performed similar services at a cost of $7,064 per new business started and $319 per client serviced. The numbers don't lie. It's very obvious which one of these programs is a much better return on investment, ROI, for the taxpayers. However, the budget request seeks a 400% increase for community navigators and a 10% budget decrease for the SBDCs. So, Administrator Guzman, I'll be sending you a letter to get more information on this program, but I wanted to ask, why are you looking to transfer funds from a program that is more effective and has a bipartisan support to an ineffective program that was passed along party lines?
At the SBA, we try to look holistically at the entire entrepreneurial ecosystem. We're increasing by $14 million our entrepreneurial development programs, leaning into supporting our veterans, as we just launched the successful vet certification program, leaning into contracting and capital assistance. We provide grants to organizations to help get businesses capital ready and contract ready, as well as all of our incredible resource partners. They all serve a different function. During the pandemic, we saw huge gaps with in the initial rounds of PPP, for example. Businesses that were the smallest of the small or underserved were unable to access relief. They didn't know how to navigate the system. And so clearly we need to ensure that we have a strong ecosystem that works together. The purpose of the Community Navigator program, and we're happy to share more data to demonstrate that it has strong results, they've been working with existing businesses to fortify them. We see that there's less performance because of a lack of investment across women and minority founders, as an example. We want to make sure that they can deliver for the economy just as all our businesses. Right. So it's a comprehensive approach, and I welcome further discussion in your letter.
Invest money, make money. My time is up. I'm sorry, and I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Guzman, I have a lot of questions, so please try to be brief. Associate Administrator Kelly assured us that SBA was working to improve lending to ESOPs and co-ops. However, last December we heard testimony that SBA proposed rule does nothing to improve lending to ESOPs. When will the agency finally implement changes to expand 7A loans to ESOPs and co-ops?
We've implemented some changes, but clearly we need to continue to go further. And so we're hoping with this affiliation rule with the partial buyout, that'll help assist. We've also launched an SBIC that is focusing on ESOPs in particular. So we are continuing to try to work with the industry to address issues.
What is that the proposed rule doesn't provide anything?
The affiliation rule allows for a partial buyout. So, for example, if an owner wanted to transition to some of their employees, right now they'd not be able to do that. It calls for a full exit. And so with this, it allows for an owner to stay in place, transition to employee ownership as a potential exit strategy, since it is difficult to sell your business, and then that way, allow for more employee ownership.
Okay, thank you. And I just need a yes or no answer on these questions. Is it true SBA intends for fintechs to participate in the 7A program when the SBLC moratorium is lifted?
We intend for non-depositories, so that could include fintechs along with others.
Okay. And have you heard concerns with allowing unregulated companies, some associated with significant fraud, into a federally guaranteed program?
I don't share those concerns because I know that the SBA has a rigorous application process for the SBLC program and intends to hold any business that wants to participate to account to their performance, to their underwriting standards, to transparency, to borrower protections, and to extreme oversight.
That's what we heard from the big banks. And here we are, with two banks going underwater. So I've been telling you that you got to do due diligence, and I hope that you're doing so. But can you tell me what are the type of steps that you are taking to protect the integrity of the 7A program?
Most definitely. I mean, obviously, that's our first and foremost priority. We deliver a zero subsidy. That is true for this rule as well, and we'll be able to continue to provide fee relief across our loan products. We hold ourselves to a high count in terms of ensuring performance. That's why we do quarterly reviews of our entire portfolio. We have great technology and great systems to do so.
Thank you. And 4 years ago, the director of the Office of Credit Risk Management testified that the office was increasing its personnel to 42 FTEs to better fulfill its mission. Currently, there are 29 FTEs in Okrom. How does the agency plan to conduct oversight over the new SLBCs with fewer employees in Okrom? And how much of your budget will be dedicated to hiring more Okrom personnel?
Yes, we have 29 individuals, but we also have 7 contracts that support our Office of Credit Risk Management with personnel and with technology. We did a thorough analysis to see what our capacity for growth and competition would be, and we assessed that we would do no more than 30 nonprofit lenders, an additional 3 non-depository institutions.
So
And
you're
that-
telling
with
me
cap-
that the 29 FTEs, that will be enough with the contractors that you're bringing in?
Based on our analysis of what the office would have capacity to deliver, yes, and we are committed to continuing to, review our resources and support our OCRM, because obviously it's a critical function at the agency.
I understand late last year, the agency abruptly canceled a public briefing on the issuance of new SOPs that detail lender responsibilities. When do you intend to issue this SOP?
We're working right now to finalize our 3 rules for capital access and investments, and we, alongside, obviously, are wanting to put in all the processes in place, so the SOP as well. So hopefully, as soon as we can get through all that internal review.
And will you commit to briefing the committee on the details of the SOP and any other proposed rules that make significant changes to the SBA program in a timely manner?
Yes.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I now recognize Mr. Lukemeyer from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Guzman, welcome. We've had a lot of discussions over the last couple of years, and one of them last term was about your employees showing up for work. So today, how many people that work for the SBA are working from home?
We have about 1% of our full-time employment, our full-time employees in remote stance. However, we do have a mission-based, mission-aligned remote work policy overall. And so I believe I shared with you that we have employees working up to 2 days per pay period. So and while many more come in more frequently, and obviously I said mission-based remote status. Some offices are 5 days a week. Some offices are 3 days a week. We still
Ms.
are in
Guzman,
a
no
position.
offense, that is not acceptable. Everybody should be back at work. COVID's over. The president himself said, COVID's over. We don't need people working from home. We need people in the office so you can oversee them to make sure we get the job done. How many applications are you behind right now
Applications behind.
for loan applications?
We've actually, the SBA's performance has been remarkable over the years that we've been in a pandemic.
That's
and
what I
remote
ask.
work.
I'm not looking at how remarkable it was over the years. I ask you how many are
Now,
capacity
even
right now?
today, we've been able to streamline services around our certifications to increase the rate of certification during this
Ms.
time.
Guzman, I sit on the Financial Services Committee. I have to put up with the Federal Reserve Chairman coming in ever so often, and I've listened to 3 or 4 of them. You are really good at, just like they do with the Fed two-step. You don't answer my question. I ask you, how many people today are at home working? Can you give me an answer, or do I need to write you a letter about this?
No, I mean, we have just over 2,800 full-time employees. And as I said, 1% are fully remote. The rest of them are in this flexible remote position. And so
Okay.
as the president's declaration of the pandemic expires in May, we continue to work towards solutions for the future.
Next
of work.
question. A minute ago, the ranking member asked you a question with regards to fintechs. You're looking to do fintech expansion or expand into fintech's ability to access your programs. Who was the biggest problem with regards to fraud in the PPP program?
Studies have shown that fintechs and banks were high performers, as well as some.
Oh, Ms. Guzman,
concerns.
come on now. We had the IG report from the guy sitting in your chair, and most of the problems in the PPP program were the fintech companies. Why are you denying that? Here is it because what you're doing is expanding to the very people who are the problem children. They do not perform the kind of auditing and oversight over themselves that the banks do. Why do you want to expand into the very people who are the problem children in the programs that we've already gone through?
Again, as I shared, those 3 SBLCs that I would have available when lifting the moratorium would have to go through a rigorous review process at the SBA. We would not be aligning with anybody that was identified during the oversight panel.
So anybody
which
who's had a
included banks and
PPP
fintech.
problem in the past will not be somebody who can access the program. Is that what you just said?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So any fintech company that had a problem with the PPP program would be somebody who can't access these programs, the rest of your programs. Is that
In
correct?
fact, we've banned the 2 fintechs that were identified within the Clyburn
Okay.
report from ever participating with
Very good.
SBA.
SBA's fiscal year 24 request is $10 million for climate change administrative expenses so the SBA can hire experts to update policies on climate issues. Money that could be used to address your vast amount of fraud and servicing needs is instead going towards climate change experts. Not only that, according to Job Creators Network poll from last month, small business across the nation are most concerned about overregulation, cutting taxes, foreign competition, of course, inflation. I don't see climate change on the list. Explain to me how $10 million for climate change expenses will help a small business in Missouri address 6% inflation or any other real concerns they have.
The $10 million will be used within our Office of Capital Access programs to help get out effectively capital access for businesses to position themselves for resilience. We know from FEMA, their data shows that if a business is impacted by a natural disaster and they don't reopen within 5 days, they will close within a year. And so we are working hard to build up their
That's not even
resilience.
climate change. You're talking about a FEMA responsibility there.
I'm talking.
That has nothing to do with the question I just asked.
I can respond to the question.
So I got
regarding
one quick
climate.
question before my time runs out here. I've asked you this question before. Do you talk to the president very much?
The president has been remarkable about
Do
ensuring
you
that the
talk to the
cabinet
president
members-
at all?
Yes, I do.
Okay. How many times have you talked to him since the beginning of the year?
The president convenes his cabinet regularly and participates and is
How many times have
prioritizing small
you
business.
talked to the president since the beginning of the year?
Again, my conversations with the president are private, as are any frequency or.
So my question is, have you explained to him about the problem that we're having with taxes right now with his proposal?
The president's proposal is focused on lowering costs for
So
small
you haven't
businesses
talked to him
and
about it
families.
then. You just told me that you did not do that. That is dereliction of duty, madam. You're an advocate for small businesses from everything from all the rules and regulations to the tax policy. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Phillips from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Guzman, I want to thank you for what you're trying to do to help small businesses after 3 terrible years for all of us, for small business owners. And I know nothing is perfect, but I know your head and heart are in the right place, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for coming to Minnesota just last week, spending time with me. Did an on-the-job with Dean at Tierra Encantada, had lunch at Duke's on 7, a recipient of PPP loans, and then had a great roundtable where you heard directly from a number of stakeholders and particularly about my personal mission to help expand employee ownership of enterprises. So I'd like to begin by simply asking you about your perspective on employee ownership, what the SBA and you are doing to promote it. I believe it's an extraordinary intersection between Democrats and Republicans to build wealth for hardworking people who contribute to economic success. And as all the evidence indicates, it actually is accretive to business performance. So just love your thoughts on the subject and what the SBA is doing, and most importantly, what we can do to help you do more to incentivize, promote, and support employee ownership.
Well, thank you for that. The employee ownership for sure is definitely a benefit to small businesses who will deploy it. Studies have shown that they have a stronger performance as the employees are vested and committed to the mission in a whole new way. I would say that on employee ownership from the SBA's perspective, we view that it's a very effective succession plan as well as businesses look to exit. So from multiple fronts, we help support small businesses in this regard. We've done it both on the technical assistance side, trying to provide knowledge and assistance sharing, information about employee ownership and ESOPs to through our network of resource partners to small businesses directly who are seeking alternatives. In addition, within our lending program, it's been challenging for employee owners to access the program, so we're constantly looking for ways to improve the program, not only on the lending side, but on the investment vehicles as well. And so I'm hopeful with the changes that we're making, as well as with the new interest in our SBIC program, to see progress on the capital access front.
Okay, and to that end, I mean, access to capital is the foremost challenge, as the chair, ranking member ably pointed out. The Main Street program, the 2018 program, I think has only resulted in 17 7A loans to conversions. I think that's too few. I think the SBA has acknowledged that. Would love to see incremental support for that. I also am hearing from some that losing preferred contracting status, which is something that came up in Minnesota, is an impediment. The fear that if they convert to an employee ownership model or a co-op, that they might lose preferred status. Can you speak to that? And are there some ways perhaps that we might work together to eliminate that risk and ensure that we can promote employee ownership?
Most definitely, after flagged by the constituents in your district, I'm looking into it further in terms of the contracting and certification side of SBA, the entry point for contractors. And then in addition, interested in observing and tracking the pilot that Department of Defense has deployed to try to be more inclusive of employee ownership in contracting specifically.
Is there something you might need from us to accomplish that?
At this point, I don't believe it's any statutory block, but I will, definitely follow up to see if there's a pathway on the certification specifically that could be, more specific and give us language that would help power a more inclusiveness around our certification programs for government contracting.
Okay, I appreciate that. I extend an invitation, a warm invitation to my colleagues on both sides to look for ways that we can use this platform of ours and the SBA to encourage more ownership. I see no reason why it shouldn't be a mutual goal, one to which we can work in unison, and I simply extend that invitation.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will surely yield.
I don't know for how long since we passed my legislation. We have been working hard to get more lending, because this is the problem. If we don't provide access to capital,
Exactly.
it's not going to work.
And if I could add on that, and we did discuss this, but one of the big issues flagged is the personal guarantee.
Yep.
And SBA, cannot move forward on removing a personal guarantee that's core to our program. So that would be something that would need to be statutory.
So most of all, thank you for listening. Thanks for coming to Minnesota. I know you're traveling the country. I encourage other members of the committee to extend that invitation to you too and hear the same thing. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Stauber, who also is from Minnesota, for 5 minutes.
The northern part of Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Administrator Guzman, thanks for being here again. And, as a former small business owner, I remain extremely concerned about the nearly $320 billion of additional regulations this administration has put on small businesses and our farmers. This number is set to only get worse when the disastrous WOTUS rule takes effect. Last year, as you know, you and I spoke about the need for agencies to consider the negative impacts that this rule would have on American small business owners, farmers, and manufacturers. And I asked you to ensure that a SBRIFA panel was held to better understand their concerns and the significant economic negative impacts of the WOTUS rule. Did this happen?
No,
In fact, to make matters worse, the EPA and Army Corps made the claim WOTUS wouldn't have significantly impacted small businesses and the entities without even talking to them. Did you have conversations with them as the administrator, the protector of small businesses across the United States?
Within the SBA, actually, the Office of Advocacy, which is an independent office within the SBA, is the one responsible for ensuring regulatory compliance and that they can assess the small business impact.
So SBRIFA wasn't, a panel wasn't put together on the WOTUS rule? You allow the EPA and the Corps to make that decision?
The Office of Advocacy is the entity responsible by statute for implementing SBREFA. Again, I respect their independence, but in talking to the Office of Advocacy regarding this, they did do a couple of roundtables and were in constant contact with EPA, but a SBREFA panel was not done.
I can tell you that I've had roundtables across northern Minnesota, and their biggest concern is the regulations, including WOTUS. And so we needed you to be the protector. And I gave you heads up last year on protecting the small businesses and the farmers. That was one of the biggest pieces of conversation that I took from those meetings. So tell me the reason why SBREFA panel was not held before the WOTUS rule was finalized as required by law.
As I believe you stated within your earlier statement, that the SBREFA panel was not implemented because EPA had certified that there was not significant impact. And Office of Advocacy.
Do you agree with that?
I am not the one who analyzes it or oversees it.
You can't do the Texas two-step here, although Mr. Williams would love you to do the Texas two-step. Do you believe that the WOTUS rule does not affect small businesses and farms?
I have not done the analysis myself, so
It's
I
extremely
cannot-
concerning that we are witnessing federal agencies implement this rule without the protection, or rather protecting our small businesses. And you're at the point to protect them. And I think in this instance on the WOTUS rule, you failed in protecting the small businesses. I'm also extremely concerned that we are witnessing federal agencies implement ESG policies under this administration. As you know, the SBA is responsible for the licensing and regulating SBICs. In 2022, the SBA licensed 29 SBICs that supporting over $2 billion, that's what the B, $2 billion in capital. My question, do any SBICs consider ESG factors when choosing small businesses to invest in?
As all of the large financial institutions recommend, and as Wall Street has supported, not considering ESG is a mistake and something that could lead to financial risk. So, I'm sure that many of my SBICs responsible for their fiduciary responsibility to their investors are looking at all risk.
You agree putting forth ESG factors are important when choosing SBICs choose small business to invest in. Do you agree with that?
I agree with the Wall Street experts who have determined that that is a financial risk, and it's something that all fiduciaries should be looking at, yes.
Can you tell me for a fact that the SBA does not consider ESG factors when determining what SBICs to license?
We do not restrict any SBICs who do not consider ESG. And so we have 300 SBICs today, and we're continuing to look to expand our SBICs across the country.
Do you have, my last question, because I'm running out of time, do you think $320 billion in new regulatory costs on American small businesses is good or bad?
Look, much of the regulation, especially the over 60 regulations that we're putting forward, are about simplification. So just because regulations are being put out there, that doesn't mean that it isn't about cutting red tape and simplifying our current system.
Yeah, with all due respect, I disagree with your assessment on the $320 billion is good for small businesses, because it's not. And I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Golden from Maine for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Administrator Guzman. In the past, some of us on the committee have held hearings and also expressed concern that the Community Navigators Program should not be duplicative of the work of small business development centers, women's business centers, SCORE, or the Veterans Business Outreach Centers. And obviously, a lot of the testimony we received was that they would act more as a force multiplier than as being in competition with these existing resource partners that are out there and have been out there for a long time working with small businesses around the country. The President's budget directs a $30 million increase to the Community Navigator Program, but also makes cuts would make cuts to the small business development centers, roughly a 14% cut. As well as a 40% cut to the SCORE program. And when you add these two together, it almost equals the amount that you're proposing an increase to the community navigators. The most recent metrics that we have available to us demonstrate that both the SBDCs and SCORE are overperforming. They're more than meeting their stated targets when it comes to job creation, number of people assisted, amount of capital that they have brought into the business community. And we're really lacking in any kind of data or metrics as it relates to the navigators. So I guess my question is, why would, at this point, the president propose cutting funds from partners who we can see are meeting their targets and even overperforming their targets, who have longstanding relationships out in the business community, particularly the SBDCs, which we see from the metrics enjoy a 93% satisfaction rating from the clients that they do provide services to. It's almost as if they're getting punished for succeeding. And we're being asked to make a big shift here in putting such a large increase into a program for which we're lacking similar data. What is the justification for both the cuts and the increase?
And again, we see an increase overall in our entrepreneur development, but we're faced with the challenge of having to
Correct.
evolve.
I'm interested in
Yes.
the shifting of funds rather than the top line of.
So as we're trying to evolve and prioritize inclusion in a way that reflects that at the beginning of the pandemic, as I mentioned, many communities were left behind. And so we do an incredible job reaching small businesses through our resource partners, over 750,000, but we have 33 million small businesses with constant births and deaths. It is an insurmountable challenge. If I had enough resources, obviously I feel strongly that the SBDCs, the WBCs, the VBOCs, all of them are do an incredible job reaching small businesses. But there are gaps that we're trying to fill and create a more cohesive ecosystem that is inclusive. And so I would also state that the Navigators program has also outperformed, and we've seen incredible work from the Institute for IVMF, the Institute for Veteran Military Families, the ethnic chambers, the LISC that focuses as well on rural. So we've seen incredible performance in building trust and building bridges, and great referrals and collaboration amongst the network as well. So the hope is to increase the amount of reach that we have across our network, work in new ways to build trust in communities so that we don't leave people behind.
Thank you. Well, I haven't seen any metrics in front of the committee in regards to how the navigators are performing, but are you not worried that by shifting resources into this program to fill any gaps that you see, that you're going to create gaps amongst those communities that are working very closely with SBDCs or VBOCs or women business centers?
Clearly, I mean, we're obviously working within limited resources. These are all great programs that I'd love to see funded, but I do need to continue to prioritize, some of the other elements as well. Like I said, the veterans, the contracting, as well as the access to capital and the navigators as a new source of building an ecosystem. We incentivize and provide a base structure for a lot of these resource partners who are able to then get additional support in the community, and I hope to see them all continue to thrive.
Well, this just recalls for me a hearing that we had in the last Congress in this committee where we expressed concern about how the community navigators may draw away from our existing resource partners. And I think that's unfortunate to see that reflected in the budget. And of course, have an interest in working with my colleagues on the committee to try and address that in a way where we don't have to take from one successful program in order to try and address a gap within a new program.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I now recognize Mr. Musser from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator, for being with us. So less than 2 years ago, I'm going to go back to the non-federally regulated lenders and related to the SBLCs. But less than 2 years ago, it was stated, the SBA stated they do not have the administrative resources needed to oversee non-federally regulated lenders. With a nationwide 7(a) lending platform, in addition to the 14 SBLCs it currently regulates. What's changed?
I'm not familiar with those statements that you're referencing, but we have, now a strong system in place with the 7 contracts that I referenced, as well as the 29 employees. We have just in 2020 to 2021, we've done over 2,200 risk assessments in the portfolio, and again, we assessed what our capacity would be and limited our expected growth based on that to just 3 non-depositories.
Okay, so you don't think there's going to be a so-called subsidy rate impact as a result of this expansion for non-federally regulated SBLCs? Like
No, in
fintechs?
fact, the rules are baked in to the current subsidy modeling, and so as a result, they will not have an
If
impact
there
on
are,
subsidy.
will anybody get terminated? Will be anybody accountable for making bad decisions that cost taxpayers?
We do. The lenders are held accountable to, obviously giving loans with a strong ability to repay. And so we have an opportunity to continue to track performance as we do on a quarterly basis and throughout the year. And if we identify problems, we have the power to revoke a license
And
at
as
any
been
time.
stated,
Revoke a license.
because that was the history, certainly with the EIDL and the PPP. So you could understand the level of concern.
And what I would share is that the PPP was such a different program. I can't even cross-reference the performance on PPP or COVID EIDL.
But
for that matter.
85% came from the fintechs. And I don't have a problem necessarily with fintechs. I really have the problem with that they're not federally regulated. Why not have a federally regulated fintech and invite them in to the 7A program once it gets established?
Well, we have demonstrated results on our SBLCs as well as in our SBA Express program that gives us data to know that we can move forward with expanding access to capital. And Main Street, I don't think, can wait for us to try to figure out capital. I would argue that by inserting the SBA programs into any fintech operation, you are actually going to get stronger oversight and regulation because they are going to have to
No,
use
seems
the
to be a
SBA's
strong
programs
leniency
of terms and conditions.
towards this, and I'm just trying to figure out why. Now, the OCRM, you testified yesterday in the Senate, stated that the capacity to take on more, regarding the capacity to take on more lenders, but the OIG, the OIG publicly disagrees, stating in a report released just this past Tuesday that the OCRM resources are threadbare with 38% vacancies.
And
That doesn't build confidence.
Well, my understanding is that report, too, is based on 2015 to 17. So a lot has happened at the SBA. We've scaled dramatically to meet the needs of small businesses during the pandemic. And obviously, those learnings, the GAO risk framework that we've put in place at the SBA, all the controls that we put in place, position the SBA to be much stronger, to be able to strengthen.
Seems to be a bit of an irrational exuberance for heading into added players such as fintechs that are not federally regulated. So we'll continue to watch that. So the SBDCs, which just came up with by one of my colleagues, they have been performing so well, and yet, as he stated, they're being punished by their budget being reduced. I've got several in my district. Why?
I don't, this is not a punishment. I think the SBDCs are strong performers within the ecosystem, to be clear. And obviously working within limited resources, we wanted to ensure that we were investing where small businesses have shared concerns around capital access.
I'd like you to try to look into that, because that would really be unfortunate for a lot of businesses, and certainly for those organizations themselves, and for many parts of my district, frankly. Back to the WOTUS question. The SBA's mission is to protect the interests of small business, and yet the SBA Office of Advocacy say that the EPA should withhold this rule and other rules that do not properly consider their effect on small businesses. I mean, would you consider advocating against this WOTUS rule that every one of my farmers has serious issues with?
I provide
family farms.
I value the Office of Advocacy deeply, and obviously, their independence is really important. That's the way they were structured to report to me, Congress, as well as the President. They are continuing to do SBREFA panels across the board, including multiple at EPA today.
My time has run out. Thank you, Administrator. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next, I recognize Mr. Mfume from the state of Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Guzman, I want to go back to this matter of fraud. I can't get away from it because there are so many people who believe, rightly or wrongly so, that we don't do enough to protect the government and taxpayer dollars from the vicious people who come up with schemes to defraud the government. And in May of last year, the Office of your Inspector General found that the SBA didn't have adequate fraud protection prevention. and the mechanisms were not there. Their assessment was that some of it had to do with the speed of the rollout of PPP, and that some of it had to do with what is unfortunately a continuous and rapid discovery of new and different fraud schemes. So I was listening when the ranking member asked the question about full-time employees, with the assessment being that there should be at least 42, and the reality being as it is that there are 29. So I don't understand that gulf. If the recommendation was made, it seems to me there was adequate justification for it. And if we are not there, what is the adequate justification for being not there?
The Office of Credit Risk Management does not oversee fraud at the SBA. They strictly monitor our portfolio of loans within the Office of Capital Access. More broadly than that, we have hundreds of people working on fraud on an ongoing basis. And so we have a fraud risk management framework that was implemented during the Biden-Harris administration as recommended by the GAO. We've also taken efforts to implement all IG recommendations across the board. We have strong performance in terms of complying with those.
Including the recommendations against self-certification?
On the contracting programs. We continue to try to evolve our contracting programs.
But is that a yes or no?
Not across the board. We continue to try to work through what exactly we can do to ensure that our self-certification program, the Women-Owned Small Business Program, specifically, I believe
It just seems to me that self-certification in and of itself begs for misuse. And since that has been a problem with a number of Inspector General reports, why is it the SBA won't move to eliminate that?
We always look for technology and solutions to improve our programs, as we have done with the Vet Cert program is our gold standard now in terms of performance, which the IG has agreed is a strong system of controls. And so we are focused on making sure that we can translate those learnings across our certification programs.
But the IG also concerns and considers self-certification the wrong way to go about doing things. So if we're implementing their suggestions, why aren't we implementing that one?
Specifically on that one, first to be clear, that we still look at size standards. We have them attest to their size within that program, but we still are able to look at some controls for size. Obviously 99.9% of all businesses are small. We're talking about a very small fraction of businesses that we have to ensure do not get into our programs.
I don't have a lot of time, but seems to me if all I have to do is self-certify to cross the hurdle, I'm going to continue to do it. That's the worst thing that I've ever heard of, particularly now in light of how much fraud has come about. Can you provide an update on the operations of the Risk Management Board, briefly?
The Fraud Risk Management Board was put into place. It's a GAO, a recommendation across the federal government, and the SBA deployed that. It includes ensuring that cross-collaboration across our program offices, that senior leadership sit on this Fraud Risk Management Board so that we can, share best practices around the agency, but ensure controls are put in place from our CFO.
And it's a very important board. It's a very important board. I understand there's a detailee that's running the board. Is that correct?
A detailee that's running the board. Our CFO is chairing the board. That's a senior executive service member, and so
the program manager.
The program manager position was open for filling, and it might have already been filled at this point. And in the meantime,
my information is that it's not been filled. But why is it taking, if it's not been filled, so long? If we consider this a priority.
It is a priority, and that has not been questioned. The GAO Comptroller General, who I meet with quarterly, as well as the IG, who I meet with biweekly, have recognized the work that we've done. Obviously, in setting up a new program at the SBA, we have to take the resources, the best and the brightest, from all across the agency.
My time has expired, Madam Administrator. I hope that the seriousness of these questions goes beyond just this hearing.
Thank you.
I'm not going to let go of this one.
All right.
That's a very important position.
Thank you. Yes.
I now recognize Ms. Van Dyne from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I really appreciate my colleagues questioning on the fraud, the amazing amount of fraud that we've seen. Administrator Guzman, you're painting a picture that small businesses across the country are thriving, but I don't see that being any farther from the truth. Every single small business that I talk to in North Texas is struggling from high inflation and an overburdensome regulatory environment. You know, Mr. Lugemeyer's questioning, you know, are you talking to the president? It wasn't sarcastic. He asked that question because we legitimately want to know who is talking to the administration, who is the voice of small businesses in the president's ear. Because what I'm seeing, at least in my district, and I'll tell you, we've had a lot of people who've come to this small business hearings and have told us the exact same thing. Their wishes, their concerns, their priorities are not being reflected in this administration's priorities or their agenda. In fact, they're being immediately hurt. In your testimony, you said under your leadership that you put guardrails to stop fraud, and yet the SBA decided to stop collecting PPP loans that exceeded a balance of $100,000, not grants, but loans. That led to $4.6 billion in potentially fraudulent PPP loans. We've seen $78.1 billion in potential fraud in EIDL loans, and then $1.1 billion in SBA loans. And you're refusing to collect on that. Do you think that should stop fraud?
I can address that last part first. Those loans, 100,000 and under, first off, with separate fraud from those 100,000 and under, any loan, whatever size, will be pursued for fraud. And we continue to flag all of those loans for the IG.
How do you know?
For pursuit. We've actually reviewed all of our 12 million loans within the PPP program to ensure that we identify.
So how much then do we, since you looked at every single one of them and you know which ones are fraud and which ones aren't, how much is it in fraud and fraudulent?
We're still continuing to flag loans and refer them over to the IG. We've so far to date referred tens of thousands. But just because a loan has an indicator of fraud does that does not mean that it's going to be fraud. And so there's a lot of work and analysis that has to go in play, and so we'll know as time moves on.
But how do you know if you're not even going back, if you're counting them as grants and not loans? How do you even know?
They continue to have a flag, so they're not forgiven, they're not removed until we can identify whether or not they're fraud. So we and I will speak though to the 100,000 and under, and just let you know that obviously we take fraud seriously, as well as those who misuse the program. We also have to be good, prudent.
And I appreciate that. Do you think you're ever going to get this money back?
We have been able to successfully.
How much of the nearly $85 billion in fraud have we gotten back?
Overall, inclusive of all clawbacks, is $29 billion that the IG.
So the
reports.
$85 billion we've received $29 billion back?
I don't know the 85 billion and what specifically that includes.
So
but will the
$4.6
IG
billion
report-
PPP loans, $78.1 billion in EIDL, and $1.1 in SBA loans.
What the IG says is that we've been able to recover $29.5 billion across PPP and EIDL in collaboration with
So
the
what are
banks
they
as
what are
well
they
as the
doing with
Secret
those
Service. The funds either initially went back to the SBA or to the Treasury, but of course all those funds, as the program has been closed for quite some time, have been returned.
So we've got $29 billion that we need to.
No, that actually has already been clawed back, and I know that it has been used and already either redirected to another program or taken back to Treasury. So there's no more funds at the SBA to use.
Okay. So the SBA received $3.4 billion at the beginning of the pandemic. That was to be an assistance for COVID relief programs, right? When you took office, half of that hadn't even been spent yet. So as of January 21st, right before you took office, SBA had hired 6,000 temporary employees for the office that runs the EIDL program. They had hired an additional 400 for the PPP program. How are we looking at $85 billion worth of fraud when we hired all of those people and we're still trying to get those dollars back? And what are you doing to make sure that doesn't happen again?
Yeah, and unfortunately in 2020, when those programs were deployed, there were not the same controls that we implemented in 2021, including on the EIDL program, not checking and validating tax returns, not checking the Treasury do not pay list. We implemented those controls. So when you hear records of fraud, it's the entire portfolio. We don't separate from administration to administration.
But you would have dates on the fraud.
We have, I'm sorry, what?
You would have dates on the fraud.
Correct. And so
can
we've
implemented. Can you
implemented.
provide this committee of the $85 billion potential in fraud when that was committed?
I don't know what the 85 billion is, but we're happy to work with you closely
I yield back my time.
to
Thank you
figure
very
out.
much.
Thank you, and I now recognize Ms. Chu from California for 5 minutes.
Administrator Guzman, first I want to thank you so much for joining me in my district last month to visit with the small business owners that surrounded the Monterey Park shooting site in California. 11 people died last month, and you visited those businesses. Your visit and your ability to provide resources for them was appreciated by the businesses so much. So thank you so much for that. And I commend you on your focus on increasing access to capital for hard-to-reach, underserved small businesses just like this. I share this focus, and I look forward to continuing to work together on this important goal. And that's why I've worked on legislation to codify the Community Advantage Pilot Program, which is, I believe, one of the strongest tools for reaching underserved businesses. In fact, SBA's own data shows that in 2022, Community Advantage reached significantly more women and minority-owned businesses than the traditional 7A program. I believe that codifying it is the best way to make the program work for the people. And also to make sure that no future administration can dismantle it. In November, the SBA issued the proposed rulemaking for SBLC and said that lifting the SBLC moratorium is needed to make sure that persistent gaps would be met, especially in Community Advantage. However, just last April, SBA made changes to the Community Advantage pilot program, including allowing new lenders to join the program and increasing the loan limit. So why is SBA not waiting to assess the impact of those changes before declaring that the Community Advantage pilot program needs to be changed?
The Community Advantage Program has been successful for 12 years. We are committed to making sure that it can scale. They do about 500 loans a year. We do typically 50 to 60,000 loans total. We'd really like to see, especially these community-based lenders who reach underserved markets, expand in our program. And so clearly it's important that they have permanence because their ability to raise capital, to grow their program, really depends on that certainty, as any business would face. And so, with this program, we feel that the 12 years of success are strong. We also have implemented improvements by extending the program, as you've mentioned, as well as agreeing to expand it within the pilot environment. But a pilot is not permanent, and a pilot really limits their ability to scale and grow, which is so needed right now with huge gaps in small dollar lending, persistent and unmovable. So we hope to continue to serve the needs of those underserved businesses by expanding it immediately by moving them into a special Community Advantage SBLC program that would give them the exact same features.
Right. Well, that's actually what I wanted to ask another question about that. I understand that you would create this new Community Advantage or mission-based SBLC license, and it would make the Community Advantage program permanent, which I applaud you for doing. However, I'm very concerned that the proposed rule does not establish a minimum threshold of underserved lending for the new Community Advantage SBLCs. Right now it is 60% that they have to make sure that they serve underserved markets, certain specific ones, at 60% of their loans. And why? Well, I'm very concerned if we don't have a specific goal that threshold will not be met, and also if we don't specify underserved markets, the types of markets that they have to serve. Are you considering changing this in the final rule and using the same underserved lending requirements already used in Community Advantage within this new Community Advantage SBLC model?
I'm happy to work with your office and discuss it further. The entire 7A portfolio doesn't have any specific requirements on it. 58% of our loans do go to underserved communities, women, veterans, rural, and LMI. We are committed to ensuring that the Community Advantage partners who are CDFIs, who are CDCs, their mission lenders, continue to perform not only for their mission and achieving their goals, with the CDFI fund at the Treasury as an example, but that they continue to focus on these marketplaces. So I'm happy to talk to you further about that. At this time, we were not imposing anything across the 7A portfolio.
But we can continue to work on that and make that possibly in the final rule then.
Exactly, and we actually can prioritize the types of licenses we bring in, again, focusing on the 30 nonprofits, but ensuring that they're filling gaps in the marketplace.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Alford from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this important hearing today. Appreciate that, and thank you, Administrator Guzman, for being here today. I have a strong affinity for small business, having been a small business owner back in my district. It is really the fabric, as you know, of our society, the rich fabric of America, small business, creating prosperity, I think patriotism, unity, things that our country needs right now. I think we can agree on that. But small businesses also need some things. They need clarity, they need certainty, and they need a government and an SBA that works with them and not against them. Small businesses certainly do not need an SBA that is more interested in promoting the far-left Biden agenda and wastefully spending taxpayer dollars. So looking at the summary of changes in the President's budget, we see a request for $1 million to transition the federal vehicle fleet to zero emissions. We see $10 million in climate change administrative expenses. And the SBA will continue to support Executive Order 14057 to minimize greenhouse gas emissions. How is this helping small businesses flourish in America and prosper as Americans?
We know that small businesses are affected by the increasing number of natural disasters as a result of climate change. Our focus as the SBA, who comes into play after a disaster to provide financial relief to not only small businesses, but the nonprofits, the individual renters who are their consumers and their employees. We see it's a priority to help businesses prepare for and become more resilient to natural disasters and climate change. And so that $10 million allotment will help us across our capital programs ensure that businesses can leverage those tools to build resilience in their business, fortify physically their building if that's the case. And we hope that this will inure to our overall disaster lending portfolio.
Well, I disagree with the whole notion of that, but I know that's going to be a difference that we're not going to agree on here today. I want to get back to this fraud, the PPE. Last year, NBC reported that fraudsters really got rich from the theft as much as $85 billion, a little more than 10% of the Paycheck Protection Program. This story really hasn't gotten the attention it deserved. I think it's starting to catch on. We've been talking about here in this committee. And you've talked about how we're going to recover it. There's still $59 billion. I'm trying to do the math here. I'm not great at math. $59 billion left out there that you think that was flagged for fraud. Is that correct? That has not been recovered?
If I could clarify that, as I didn't have an opportunity to respond, but the IG has reported that he's been able to recover $29.5 billion. That might have been, businesses who gave it back, obviously early on in PPP. You recall some of those reports, and so we do not have a final number yet on fraud.
So you don't know how much money out there is ripped off from the American taxpayer?
We are still finalizing those numbers.
Can you put a guess on it, a guesstimate here?
At this point, I cannot, and I continue to work with the IG to work towards a final estimate on this. But clearly, we have done the work to identify fraud indicators, which is what that report is.
So when when an account or a person who's gotten these grants or loans has been flagged, the indication has been put on them, are their accounts frozen? Is that money frozen so they can't spend what they didn't rightfully get?
Correct. A fraud flag is an indicator to us that we need to do further analysis. And so we have steps following the fraud indicator to analyze the full platform, or the full portfolio, and ultimately leading to a manual review and a referral to the IG.
How long is this going to take?
It was a massive portfolio, a huge scaling of the SBA, obviously, we do about $50 billion a year to $1.2 trillion in relief. And so, clearly it's a large portfolio, but we are committed, which is why the president asked for another $100 million in the budget for the IG. We've stepped up the increase for the IG as well as our enforcement arm to pursue fraud.
Last question on the SBLC. This moratorium, is it going to be lifted this week? I know it's been proposed. I know there's a lot of consternation about it. When is the moratorium being lifted?
I don't have a final time yet because the team internally is still working through the comments. We had 60 days for public comment and quite a bit to work through on both the pro and the
What is the need for this? Because I've talked to a lot of community bankers and credit unions. They say, we've got people covered that want the money. We are there for them. Why is this needed, spreading the risk out for the SBA in a regulatory fashion?
Well, Federal Reserve will report that 2/3 of businesses do not get the funding at all or are incomplete to complete their full request. And so there is a huge gap.
All right.
$10 billion of the funds at the SBA were unused last year. So
I appreciate
there's clearly
that.
more.
Thank you. I yield back.
I now recognize Mrs. Glusenkamp Perez from Washington State.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Administrator Guzman, for being here and for your visit to my district. It was really meaningful to small business owners. I'm a small business owner. I own an auto repair and a machine shop, work in an independent shop. We work in the trades, and I actually have a degree in economics. I have my undergrad in econ, and it literally took me a year to fill out the SBA 504. And it's concerning that it's at times overly onerous, that the capital may not be going to where it's going to, but it's also clear that this is a vital avenue of funding for many of us who work in the trades who don't have access to traditional capital. But I actually had a conversation with Michael Larry of Source Climbing Center, who you met with when you visited our district. And Michael was having issues with pay.gov and CAFS to manage his loan. So I know that you guys have created a new website, mysba.gov. And I've heard it's definitely an improvement over the old website, but he says there's still some room for improvement. So I was wondering, what are the opportunities for feedback you've created for small businesses? How is that feedback being incorporated? And what's the timeline for launching the new website?
Yes, and I will say on the 504 program that the regulatory reform that we're embarking on is supported by the NADCO, which is the National Association of Development Corporation. So I am hopeful that we will be able to streamline the 504 program as well. Within the MySBA structure, we're trying to streamline and give a single point of entry for businesses to come and perform the services that they need. Only half of the loans from EIDL, obviously it was an enormous amount, have been transitioned to date, but we've had over $1 million supported at this point. There is a strong customer service element, and hopefully this business owner has been able to reach out, but we're continuously taking those customer service issues and translating them into continuous improvement, as technology must be.
Thank you. And like so many people in rural America, I do not have broadband at home. I get it from a radio tower. It is not good. I'm just wondering, how is the SBA keeping programs accessible for people who don't have internet or who have bad internet like we do?
Clearly, we're looking forward to broadband for everyone as the investments in the broadband infrastructure are implemented over the coming years. But in the interim, obviously the SBA tries to make an effort to distribute resources around the country. Our district offices try to go into different regions, even if for a few hours, to have some sessions and try to connect with small business owners. And it's partially why we also deployed the Community Navigator pilot program to try to focus on an expansion. It's into communities that are underserved, including rural communities. So it's a constant challenge. I've shared that we have limited reach, obviously, but important reach to those businesses, and we hope to grow it.
Yeah, and so many small businesses like mine choose to bank with our small regional banks because we know those bankers, we trust them, we believe in keeping our dollars local. And, these past few weeks have put an incredible amount of stress on small regional banks. When people have trust in their bank, they keep their money in the bank, and the bank remains solvent. But I think it's important we remember how critical small banks are in delivering SBA assistance to their community. So, for example, 67% of PPP relief was provided through small community banks, credit unions, and small financial institutions, not the big guys. So I'd like to hear from you what impact, if any, the recent Silicon Valley Bank collapse has had on small business broadly. Do you see credit conditions tightening for small businesses going forward?
Credit was tightening before, and obviously with challenges in liquidity across lending institutions, we're seeing it tighten further. I will share that 4,000 of the 4,500 community banks, when doing PPP, hadn't done an SBA loan in the last 2 years, and that's what this regulatory reform is about, is trying to make it simpler to navigate our programs, removing the most onerous elements of our regulation to ensure that the lending institutions can start to use SBA products. As guaranteed products, they sit in their books in a preferable light there, and that's a benefit to trying to ensure some liquidity at these community, ensure that limited liquidity doesn't limit our lending as well. So government guarantees are more important now than ever before, and I have heard from multiple community banks, expressing confidentially concern, as people were concerned initially about their deposits, but I think after repeated actions by the Treasury and the regulators, people are starting to feel confident as well, and we know that community banks serve their businesses and their individuals well, and people will go back for that customer service.
Thank you so much for your time here today. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Bean from Florida for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much, and good afternoon, Small Business Committee. It's good to see you, and Secretary Guzman, we're glad to have you here today. Do you have any indication by business code? I know we track business codes. Is there any business that's failing or any sector that's failing against the historical rate?
Well, the only thing that I could share is that obviously some of the industries hit really hard. The travel and tourism, restaurants continue to face more challenges with credit access, as they obviously had a lot of debt during that time that their revenues dropped. They're starting to recover and seeing those revenues come back up, but obviously facing continued challenges with inflationary pressures and tight labor market. So I would say those are the industries that I've heard most concerns from in terms of their continued challenges coming out of the COVID programs.
Very good. And I've traveled around, and on our off days, including the auto repair shop in Northeast Florida that I've visited several, 9 out of 10 small businesses right now are struggling getting people to work. What's our plan? Do you have a plan, or is the SBA saying this is what we need to do to help small businesses get the labor that they need?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, the workforce issues are a challenge. We always try to provide the technical assistance, the referrals to local workforce development programs, et cetera, so an immediate support for our businesses, but it's a larger issue. The president's budget includes strategies to increase pre-K, increase childcare. These things are challenging for small businesses whose workers can't come because of children at home or other issues as well. So as much as we can get more participation in the workforce, that'll also help our small businesses.
Well, that's the challenge, because as we enter this budget year, we're going to tighten our belt. Is there things at SBA do you think that we could reduce or cut spending on? Is there something that you should offer up now to say this is where, if you're going to cut SBA or cut, there's some fat. This is what I recommend. Is there anything that you could give us today?
We hope that the proposed budget gets approved. I know that in the past couple of years, there have been additional funding put on top of it for specialized district support. As much as we can continue to support the core programs of the SBA, that's what we prefer.
Is SBA still working from home?
Not fully, no. We have 1% of our workforce, our full-time employees, permanent staff, are in full remote. The rest of them are in mission-based remote, so that means a minimum of 2 days per pay period, so 1 day per week. However, other offices have started to move, or had already moved throughout the whole process, to 3 to 5 days. So obviously with the end of the pandemic in May, we continue to work through strategies to ensure that we're delivering our mission.
Very good. Just a few minutes ago, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Nfume, was outraged over the fraud, and there's so much of it. And I think you've noticed a theme here, because we're getting reports. Your report card shows how much fraud has walked out the door and how little it's recovered. So you could say it's bipartisan outrage over the amount of fraud, including the EIDL program. $78 billion were fraudulently obtained. That's according to the inspector. What are we doing? And here I've got a minute and a half left, and I will yield to you the remainder of that. Can you give us assurances that you're making changes? I don't have it yet. I don't have the assurance. I know it's bad, and you've said it's bad, and you said you're trying, but what are we doing to change the culture can we stop these programs to begin with because we've lost control of them? But can you give us assurance that things are being changed? That's what frustrates the American people. You can see we're all frustrated up here because everybody else follows the rules, and we look at people cheating the system. There's so many other things that we could do, and I've got 50 seconds left.
Yeah.
Can you make
Yes.
me or this committee inspired, knowing that there are big changes, that this isn't going to happen anymore at the SBA? What say you?
All COVID relief programs are closed. And in terms of the fraud implementation that we've been able to successfully do, we've implemented controls across the program. As you know, early
So we've
efforts
stopped
focused
it.
on
Has
speed.
anybody gone to jail? Has anybody?
Oh, yes.
They've gone to
There's been
jail.
multiple convictions.
And we've gotten, we have.
Yes, multiple convictions, multiple funds recovered directly from fraud, multiple indictments.
But still billions out the door, though. That's the
Still
thing.
billions out the door that's being assessed, clearly. I mean, we do not have a final number on fraud. Again, all these are reports of indicators of fraud. They may have checked one database and said these could be your potential fraud, but they haven't cross-referenced it. You know better than others that small business owners may not always check all the right boxes and have alignment. And so you got to check multiple data sources.
And we're counting on you to do that. Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Pappas from New Hampshire for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Administrator. It's great to see you again. Thank you again for visiting my district this past January. We had you in Derry and Manchester. We were at the Palace Theater talking with a number of business owners who, almost to a person, said without the support from SBA, they're not sure they'd be open today. So we're grateful for that commitment and all the work that's gone on the last few years. Of course, we're in a new phase in terms of this pandemic, and I think the work that the agency does is as important as ever to provide businesses the support they need in a really uncertain climate. Members have mentioned a number of critical issues to businesses, but I want to build on what Representative Bean was asking in terms of cuts. You said we hope the proposed budget gets approved, but I have a concern. Included in this budget is a 14% cut to the Small Business Development Center. Other members have mentioned this, but I want to stress how important SBDC is to our frontline businesses in New Hampshire. SBDC is the boots on the ground. They have increased and expanded their mission since the pandemic. They've gone from seeing roughly 862 businesses to about 1,500 businesses a year. That's a more than 70% increase since the pandemic began. And so that work continues. But the concern is that they're going to lose about $105,000 of the roughly $778,000 that they receive in a federal allocation. That means they'd have to cut 2 full-time advisors. So that would have a direct impact on the ground in terms of the support that is out there for a critical resource partner. And I just want to give you another opportunity to respond to this. Why are we cutting a successful program that provides such important assistance to our small businesses at a time where they need it more than ever?
And again, what I would reemphasize is that we're trying to diversify our entrepreneurial ecosystem to be inclusive of all types of providers. You know, the SBDCs do a remarkable job, as does our SCORE partner, as does the women's business centers. And we want to make sure that we are able to incentivize support for these great institutions across the board. And so we do need additional types of support to be more inclusive and make sure nobody's left on the sidelines. And ideally, we have enough resources to continue to support all of our great resource partners at scale, but there has to be some change to reach out to more of these micro small businesses around the country and serve them effectively.
I appreciate that. But just getting back, one of the important functions of SBDC is disaster assistance. Wouldn't cutting SBDC jeopardize that critical function and other things that we rely on them to do?
The SBA actually has a full field operation for disaster assistance, which we scale in the event of the disasters. And so, clearly we need to work on the ground with partners. Those are chambers, those are local economic development agencies. Our SBDCs are great partners on the ground as well. We hope to continue to support a strong field outreach within our disaster programs and expect to continue to partner on the ground with great organizations like the America's SBDC.
Well, one thing thing I want to note is that New Hampshire's SBDC participates in the Community Navigator program, but this isn't necessarily the case across the country in terms of what other SBDCs do. So can you provide some additional clarity around the proposal to give more money to the Community Navigators versus initially funding the pilot program at $175 million? And will only those Tier 1 national level funding programs be receiving funding moving forward? And the concern here is ensuring that resources will be effectively distributed as partners work to continue this program.
And for clarity, we're requesting $30 million for navigators, dropping down from that original 175, not an additional 30 on top, so that we intend to ensure that all of our great programs, our navigators, are successful in connecting all of our resource partners on the ground. They're there to build trust and build lines of communication to all of the entrepreneurs who could benefit from the full suite of SBA's resources on the ground. So I'm committed to continue with that effort.
One final question. I've heard this feedback from a number of small businesses in my district, and it's the frustration around federal procurement policies. And we have seen a sharp decline in the number of small businesses that are participating in federal procurement in that space. And so can you talk a little bit more about what SBA is doing to reverse that trend in the limited time you have?
Yes, we've seen a 40% decline in small businesses and participating in federal contracting. So the whole of government approach that the Biden-Harris administration has deployed means including our small businesses in procurement opportunities, creating more small dollar contracts basically for small businesses to participate by giving them category management status. But there's more to do at the SBA. We've simplified our certification program so we get more small businesses in the door and are increasing our grants, our 7J grants, which help small businesses get contract ready to participate in federal procurement.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. We've got three questioners left, Davids, Skolton, and Tanadar. So let's go to Kansas, where Ms. Davids is standing by. She's recognized for questions for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you, Administrator Guzman, for joining us today. As we've heard, oversight of the SBA is one of the most important functions that our committee here serves. And given the unprecedented last few years, it will continue to be very important. And I completely agree the PPP and EIDL programs were enormously successful at helping to sustain millions of small businesses during the worst months of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's also unfortunately true that these programs saw high rates of fraud, including in the district that I represent. And, just one example is that a business owner in Overland Park, Kansas, had to deal with fraud due to identity theft. And obviously that was through no fault of their own. And I also want to just highlight and thank your team for helping with some of my constituents to quickly close out their cases just recently, ensuring that they wouldn't be held liable for these fraudulent loans. But of course, there's still work to do. We're hearing about that. And so, Administrator Guzman, I was just hoping to hear maybe a broader description of some of the anti-fraud efforts, whether it's the PPP or EIDL programs, because I know that that's an area that you all are working on, and I just want to make sure that we have a good understanding of what the anti-fraud efforts look like.
Sure. On the PPP program, there were more limited controls when launched for speed, and so we tried to add certainty to the process, and added, of course, the do not pay system review to both COVID EIDL and PPP, as well as, of course, on the EIDL program, added the collection of tax returns. We want to ensure, of course, that in the Biden-Harris administration that we limit fraud, abuse, and so we have been following the recommendations of the IG and the GAO around our capital programs to ensure that we implement a fraud risk management framework. Again, we have hundreds of people working on fraud at the agency, but the collaboration across program offices is key to ensure that they receive the support and structure that's recommended by the IG and the GAO. So, we think that the controls combined with the management framework is what positions the SBA for stronger success outcomes on fraud. And we've seen that come to fruition. The IG has personally commented to the committees that SBA's culture from the top has shifted. We've been implementing against recommendations at a steady pace to ensure that we solve for some of the pandemic relief program holes and can deliver certainty and speed at the same time. We've demonstrated that now with the EIDL program reforms.
Speaking of the OIG recommendations related to the SBA's pandemic relief programs, I know you mentioned the including tax returns and beefing up the certainty of the programs and the collaboration that's been happening. Can you speak to the number of recommendations that OIG made to address some of the anti-fraud efforts that you've been implementing? How many are still pending? And then do you have a timeline for the implementation of those recommendations?
It's a continuous process. We've closed, on the GAO side, we've closed 6 of the 8 high-risk list items and 8 of the 15 priority, and obviously continue to try to drive towards successful outcomes with the GAO. On the IG, we've done 14 of the 21 management challenges and, over 100 of their, regular ongoing enforcement actions. And so, we know that obviously, the pandemic relief was a huge portion of all of those findings. We continue to try to drive through that portfolio, identify fraud, and work collaboratively with the IG to ensure that those individuals are prosecuted and those funds collected.
Thank you. I have limited time left, so I do just want to take a moment to highlight the work that has been going on around women's business centers. It's a very successful program. It's something that I've worked in a bipartisan way with others on this committee to make improvements to the program and make sure that it can continue to be successful. And I know SBA's recently expanded the number of WBCs across the country, and I'd love to do a follow-up conversation about the ways that we can be supportive of that effort from the perspective of this committee. Thank you so much for your time. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Michigan, where Ms. Skolton is standing by. She's recognized for 5 minutes of questions.
Why, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate that. And first of all, thank you again to Administrator Guzman. Good to see you again. Appreciate your time today. And just want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues in thanking you for leading your agency through part of the global pandemic, among other extraordinary events. As the ranking member for the Small Business Committee on Contracting, I know the importance of the 8A program for business development and how much it helps minority small businesses to compete in the federal marketplace. Administrator Guzman, could you please elaborate on some of the ongoing challenges that small businesses face in federal contracting and how the 8A program in particular is helping to level the playing field?
In addition to the decline of small businesses participating in government contracting by 40%, there's also been a decline of new entrants by 60%. So the challenges are on the outset when they're trying to get certified and start to learn about how to participate in federal contracting. And that's where the SBA steps in with its certification program. So the streamlining of our certification programs is really key, including across the 8A program. Vet Cert is now our gold standard. We just transitioned that successfully from the Veterans Administration. It's unfortunate that less people heard about it because it was such a success, and our veterans are very happy with the program and want to see those reforms implemented across all of our certifications. But it's also about how the agencies source contracts. And so we worked diligently in the Biden-Harris administration to ensure that we fought for all of our socioeconomic firms, including the 8A firms, to have access to category management status, as we call it, Tier 2. That's our strategic sourcing. So it's oftentimes large, bundled actions. And so we continue to try to advocate for opportunities for small businesses to have entry contracts and participate in federal contracting. And we believe that'll help ensure that more small businesses can participate. But the president took very strong action by creating a 15% goal for small disadvantaged businesses, which includes 8A, a 15% goal by 2025. So that's tens of billions of dollars. We're trying to ensure that we ready our 8A 8As with the proper grant funding to support a network of technical assistance providers to position them for success. And we've increased the number of procurement center representatives who connect small businesses to contract opportunities in our field offices.
That's excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for your work there. I have 3 reports here on the 8A program, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request that they be entered into the record.
Without objection, they are so entered into the record.
Thank you so much, sir. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Very good, and thank you so much. But let's stay in Michigan, where Mr. Tanadar is standing by. He's got 5 minutes, and he is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Administrator, for being here and working with us. I'm a firm believer in small businesses and advocate for them at every chance, being a serial entrepreneur myself. Establishing, expanding, and sustaining a business is a difficult job, as I know from my own experience running different companies. Despite obstacles such as lack of capital, I was able to achieve my American dream. However, the largest corporations receive the utmost attention. 99+% of the businesses in our nation are small businesses. Additionally, small businesses contribute significantly to the economy by hiring, investing, and supporting their respective committees. Nonetheless, the disparity in accessing capital remains salient for business owners, particularly disadvantaged communities. In my district, Detroit, I have witnessed the challenges presented to business owners seeking capital to grow and sustain their operations. Most of the small businesses in my district make less than $150,000 annually and have limited access to financial advisors and banking relationships, which adversely impact their bottom line. To remedy the inequities, we must look no further than history. Minorities have historically faced steep challenges as business owners. The infamous Tulsa Massacre is one of the numerous examples. On the fateful day of May 31, 1921, an angry mob descended upon the once thriving Greenwood district and unleashed a wave of terror on the black community, destroying businesses and assets worth millions of dollars without reparations to this very day. Similarly, the Black Bottom neighborhood of Detroit, an area I represent, once possessed a formidable business infrastructure. However, policies such as the National Housing Act of 1949 decimated businesses by constructing Interstate 375. To this end, the business environment is extremely challenging for minorities. During the COVID-19 pandemic, minority business owners lost a disproportionate amount of business and revenues in comparison to their white counterparts. Moreover, SBA relief programs such as the Paycheck Protection Program also highlighted stark disparities according to Harvard University data. Black-owned firms were 8.9% less likely to receive PPP loan than similar white-owned firms. Small business owners are willing and able to grow our economy, and my goal is for them to reach their entrepreneurial dreams as I did. The goal of SBA should ensure a cohesive environment to grow access to capital for all. An article in Boston Globe on racial equity stated that 8 out of every 10 black businesses failed within the first 18 months. As you know, the first year as a business owner is crucial and capital intensive. The goal of the SBA lending company rulemaking is to help reach the smallest of the small businesses, including women, minority, and veterans. Administrator Guzman, with that said, what type of gaps would you like to see any new SBLCs fill in small business lending?
Thank you. Thank you for that. And non-depository lending institutions, as well as our community advantage nonprofit lenders during PPP, were the institutions that were able to fill gaps. I mean, we know that more than half of Black businesses go straight to online services to get capital, skipping the banking system altogether. And there's no protection or set terms and condition product out there until the SBA can expand its competition and expand competition in its marketplace. And so we know that the licensing process for our SBLCs, whether they're community advantage SBLCs or regular SBLCs, will be thorough and critical, and we'll make sure that we are mission aligned, that they will be filling gaps. That'll be one of the key areas of requirement, and we hope to attract some lenders out there. Obviously, anybody could have bought an SBLC over the last 4 decades, and so the program is open to all now, but we hope to attract some lenders who want to focus on this very important issue, and we think the time is now based on our strong performance across similar programs.
Thank you, and I yield back. Thank you very much. Members, what a great day it's been in small business. I want to thank all the members on behalf of Chair Williams for coming prepared. I think we all had a great deal. Everybody here did their homework. I want to thank Ms. Guzman, Administrator. Thank you so much for being here. Over 2 hours, 15 minutes. Members, a reminder, we have 5 days, if there's no objection, 5 legislative days to submit additional materials, written questions to the witnesses through to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witness, and then she'll do her homework and bring it back. So on behalf of Chair Williams, thank you so much. And there's no other business before us. We stand adjourned.